So you've already met Lori and Sharon, and I'd like to introduce you just briefly to the other panelists. Diane De Los Santos is here to my left. She's served as the executive director of City on a Hill, which is an urban ministry in the center of Milwaukee. She's been there since 2003. She left her position as vice president of public affairs for a healthcare system after working there for 20 years. In 2006, she sold her home in the suburbs and moved onto the campus of City on a Hill, which is at 22nd and Kilbourne Avenue. In 2011, she became an ordained minister with Assemblies of God after attending Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. Her passion is to see the gospel transform her inner city neighborhood and the lives of youth and families living in poverty and oppression, so that the next generation will walk in covenant with God and raise their children for Christ. She's going to be our host this morning for the panel, and she's inspired by Isaiah 58, 9 through 12. I'm going to read it to you. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here I am. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourself in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. He will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the old age foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets and dwellings. Paints a beautiful picture. Next is Dr. Jillian Peoples. Dr. Peoples has been educating students from low socioeconomic backgrounds for over 10 years. She has also mentored students from the same background for over 7 years. She is currently the Director of Curriculum, Assistant Principal at New Testament Christian Academy, where they serve students and parents from a myriad of backgrounds, including the above mentioned. In addition, she is the mentor trainer for the Oneness School Initiative, a certified Blanchard trainer through the Blanchard Foundation, and an active servant in the youth ministry of New Testament Church. The Bible scripture that inspires her and leads her to work with the population of children and families that she does comes from Matthew 25:40. I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are doing it for me. Let's see. George. George Bogdanovich, President and CEO of Community Warehouse. The Ministry of Community Warehouse has 3 major functions. It functions to help to improve Milwaukee's underserved and impoverished areas by supplying low-cost building supplies to those in need of remodeling their homes and thus their communities. Second, they employ people from the community that normally wouldn't get the opportunity to be employed due to a lack of experience, lack of education, and/or a criminal background. And third, they are teaching employee skills: computer scanning, inventory control, light assembly, pick, pack, and ship, customer service, forklift driving, light tools, shipping and receiving, and of course, the value of work. An inspirational verse for George comes from Matthew 7:24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And at the end, Arn Quaklar. In 1996, Arn started BASICS, which stands for Brothers and Sisters in Christ Serving in Milwaukee. He intended it as a facilitating organization that would encourage Christian ministries, churches, and secular charitable organizations throughout the metropolitan area to build bridges of cooperation with each other in assisting those in poverty to find God's way to live. As part of this attempt to promote teamwork and unity, the Prison Aftercare Network was started in 2003, led by a consortium of the Salvation Army, Prison Fellowship, and BASICS. In 2009, Basics expanded its urban ministry and mission agency role to serving men and women returning from prisons, jails, and homelessness into a new organization called Genesis in Milwaukee, Inc. And ARN is inspired by Leviticus 25:35, which says, "If one of your countrymen becomes poor and is unable to support himself among you, help him as you would an alien or a temporary resident, so he can continue to live among you." So with that, just welcome the panel. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. I thought it would be useful and appropriate to just begin with a quote from a man who's one of my heroes. His name is Dr. John Perkins. I'm sure many of you have read his work. This comes from the book entitled Beyond Charity, The Call to Christian Community Development. A man who was nearly beaten to death in a Mississippi jail went on to be the founder of the Christian Community Development Association, a wonderful organization that I know some of your ministries are part of. This is what he says in his introduction to this book. "The desperate conditions that face urban America call for a revolution in our attempts at a solution. Over the course of my 35 years of living and working among the poor, I have come to believe that these desperate problems cannot be solved without strong commitment and risky actions on the part of ordinary Christians with heroic faith who believe, as the little shepherd boy David did, that our God is greater than any Goliath who dares to mock his name. God has always depended upon his people to step onto the battlefield, to assume responsibility, to take the lead, and to make his love visible to an unbelieving and mocking world. Indeed, I would have to deny God's work in my very own life to say there are no solutions to this great challenge of the poor that faces America today." And he wrote that 20 years ago. I think it's every bit as true today as it was then. And our panel is composed of people like that, ordinary Christians who have stepped out and trusted God to enable them to take risks and make a difference. And so we're hoping to learn from their learning over these years. And I've been given several questions to pose to the panel members, and we may stick to these and we may veer off of them a little bit. Probably any one of them could keep us engaged here all day, which we don't have. And so pray with me that we can stay to our time. I'd like to begin with Dr. Peoples and to ask you to begin to tackle a huge issue in whatever piece of it you would like to address. And the question is, what are the biggest problems? What are some of the root causes? And what are the toughest areas to minister in? Can you give us your perspective on that?
Thank you. I think that some of the biggest problems are definitely within the family. I think that a lot of our children are struggling with generational curses that they aren't even aware of. And it just proceeds from generation to generation. And so I really think that that is a big problem when we think about poverty and the struggles that we've talked about today. The root causes, for sure, are a lack of knowledge and a lack of education. I think that a lot of our parents are not educated, and therefore they can't teach their children the skills that they need to be successful. I also know that the absence of Christ within the home is also one of the root causes, and again, a lack of knowledge and understanding that that is the remedy to so many of the problems that our families in these conditions are suffering from. And the toughest area to minister, I don't think that there's one, but being an educator, educating is definitely one of those tough areas to ministry. And because, as Lori shared with us, there are so many other factors that are affecting these children as they are coming into the schools. And so we have to break down so many barriers and meet so many needs before we can educate. The child that is hungry, the child that slept in the car the previous night, the child that doesn't have a clean set of clothes on, it's hard to teach them math concepts and science concepts when they have so many unmet needs.
Thank you so much. And I think as we go along, probably any of us could echo everything we've heard from the previous speaker. But I'm going to ask you, George, to add to that. your perspective on this issue of, what are some of the biggest problems that you see in your ministry? What root causes come to the surface as you're working with people? And what are the toughest things that you're dealing with?
Well, I wish I could say I have this issue licked, but we don't at CW in Milwaukee Working. Our biggest challenge in my mind is to get the city as well as corporate America behind our initiative and our ministry, that they can actually trust. 4 people agree with that. That's wonderful. That they can actually trust that people in the central city work. Imagine that. I think we heard from Sharon earlier what happened in the 60s when they put the freeway in. Corporations left, families were tore apart. And I've been working down in that community for about 10 years now, grew up in that community as a child. And I think the biggest challenge is just the trust issue, because I think when we go out to outside corporations and explain what our ministry is trying to do, I think they're a little skeptical that we can pull it off. In the 7 years that we've been open, both at the store and the 1 year that we've been open at Milwaukee Working on 30th and North, we roughly have about 35 employees from the central city that don't have the skills, that don't have the education, that don't have the background, but we have made it simple for them to work. We have designed 4 different business units to teach those unskilled people how to work, and let me tell you, the success rate is overwhelming. Biggest challenge is, in my mind, is just getting the city in corporate America behind it with the right group of people and the right partners. By the way, Sharon and Larry Adams of Walnut Way, they were our first customers down at the Community Warehouse. We helped rebuild their house on 17th and North, correct? So it works in community development.
Thank you, George. I'm going to ask Sharon to piggyback on that, since you just referred to Walnut Way Conservation Corporation. I know we've heard from you, Sharon, earlier, but can you address this question for us as well?
Partially. I'm like a mirror, partially seeing it. I know that without a collective vision, we will perish. That may be high thoughts, but I believe it's true. I also believe that this obstacle to seeing value and gifts in our diversity is at the heart of it. When we begin to understand that we all have gifts and opportunity and stay with it, I think that that's important. Now, how does that translate to faith and action? Well, it means understanding that in my life, and perhaps maybe in yours, I've taken missteps, but to give people an opportunity to heal, to perform, and to perform to high expectations. This will require resources, and resources that don't put us in a pretzel, that don't allow people to be themselves and to be innovative and caring and giving to others. I'm going to stop right there.
All right. Thank you, Sharon. Arn, I know your ministry fairly well, but I learn new things from you as I hear you speak. And I want to read something and then ask you to respond to this question, reflecting on it, because I think it's something that will resonate with this audience here today. This is a book entitled Revolution of Compassion. The author says, early in our nation's history, the government cooperated with churches and faith-based social services and took the leading place only when religious groups proved unwilling and unable to carry the responsibility. So he talks about the history of Christianity in America and the founding of hospitals and schools and orphanages and all the things that believers did. He says, if we are honest, we surely have to hear as a rebuke our Lord's reminder that the second commandment, subordinate only to the requirement to love God totally, is love your neighbor as yourself. Surely we cannot blame the government for our self-preoccupation, our love of the world's treasures, or the Evangelicals Church's slow recovery from its near abandonment a century ago of social concern in its fight against the social gospel and theological liberalism. So he talks about the fact that as the church stepped back from its obligation to care for the poor, the government stepped in, and we sometimes want to critique government and the ineffectiveness of some of their work, as Dr. Perkins even does, but it's incumbent upon us as believers to take our place in this battle, or we will not see the effective transformation of our communities. And Arne, I know that you work to connect ministries and to bring resources to the Central City. So could you address this question for us? What do you see as the toughest areas, the root causes?
Well, when we look at the history of America and recognize what was mentioned in the book, in the early part of the 20th century, the church had a very strong role in dealing with all the issues of poverty and dysfunction in the community. And that was the church's role. The government took that over, as we all know, and have seen even in the most recent past, in the 1960s, where the Bible was taken out of the schools, prayer was not allowed, and we're seeing that continue today, where Christians are being continually marginalized, and even the people that don't go to church say they don't go to church because they've been in some way hurt by the church. I think it's time to try to reunite what God intended for our cities. And that's a major challenge. And what's happened is that the consequence of taking God out of our society, so to speak, a lot of our people have lost hope. They don't see God as the answer to their problems. And that makes it even more difficult for us to unite Christ's church in our community. And yet, if we're going to solve the problems, it's only through Jesus Christ that we're going to find the solutions to those problems. There are many things that we've learned about this morning with the speakers that we can do, but I think it really has to be in the context of prayer for our community, caring for our community, which is the compassion and the love that we can show for our neighbors. Then in that process, share the gospel of Jesus Christ, because that's what really people need to have the hope in their life that there's a better future for them. And then once they make that decision to follow Christ, to come alongside them and help them as a life coach, to help them and prepare them for eternity. But do that in the context of our communities today. So it's really a prayer, care, share, and prepare process of helping people to regain that hope and the transformation that we're talking about.
All right, thank you, Arne. I think we all enjoyed hearing from Lori earlier this morning. As we operate a free clinic at City on a Hill, and one of the things that I'm struck by every time I have a conversation with an adult who is there struggling with disease and struggling with issues of life is that very quickly, if they will trust you, you will hear a story of childhood trauma. And so we appreciate so much your sharing with us this morning. Is there something that you could add from your perspective on this issue of what are some of the root causes, what are some of the most difficult areas to address from your experience at Set Ministries?
Thank you, Diane. What I did not say earlier this morning is that childhood trauma is transmitted from one generation to the next. So I spoke a lot about children, but actually I think that one of our toughest problems is really more related to parents. And because not only are parents inadvertently hurting their children, they are also transmitting the pain that they are carrying from their parents and their grandparents before them. And so with this information that I have shared with you, I have come to understand what the words break the cycle. I understand those words differently now to mean break the cycle of pain. And I also understand that I sincerely believe that people are being held in poverty by their pain. They are not in pain because they're in poverty. And so that has really been a paradigm shift for me, and so that informs me about the work that we can and should be doing with parents. And I want to say that the government does not do this work. The government does not support parents until after the worst has happened. There are virtually no resources to support parents who want to do a good job with their children. Resources come into play after a family is connected with the Bureau of Child Welfare most often. So from my perspective, as a piece of advice, that is a place where government has chosen not to be active, is not likely to become active, and that's a role that Christians could really fill in our community.
All right, thank you. We probably all say amen to that. Maybe just a thought from my perspective at the Ministry of City on a Hill. We're at 23rd and Kilbourne in the old Good Samaritan Hospital building, a hospital established in the 1800s by Christians wanting to care for the poor in their city. And so now, a century later, we're back doing the same thing there. And I have the perspective of seeing the lives of children and youth. We have a lot of youth programs, and so we're dealing with young children who are in some of those very difficult circumstances that Lori describes. We offer a free health clinic, and so we see adults who are struggling with chronic homelessness and addiction and mental illness in our neighborhood. So we see sort of both ends of the spectrum there. And the other thing that we do is we provide poverty and justice training in churches across the state and outside the state of Wisconsin. And it's a challenge for me to link those things. It was Frederick Douglass who said, it's a whole lot easier to build strong children than to fix broken men. And I see that every day. And so we spend a lot of our resources with children trying to help them not follow the path that some of the adults in our neighborhood have followed. I was encouraged by Lori's comments that children in trauma, if they are supported by caring adults and a positive environment around them, they can follow a path to success rather than failure, and we see that all the time with kids. So I would say that as one of the challenges. And for adults, I'm continually challenged by the amount of time and love and investment and absorption of their pain that it takes to help them succeed, but it can be done. And then finally, as I travel around to the churches, it's sort of a wake-up call for the American church to realize we have been given so very much. And God expects far more of us than what we're doing to care for the poor around us. And so I think that one of the core issues or the root causes is really that the body of Christ has not yet stepped into its calling. There are individuals like you see on this panel who God calls in specific ways to do what might seem like huge or heroic things to us, but God calls every believer to care for the poor and to minister to the oppressed. And so many sit in the pews and haven't learned that lesson yet. So I think as all of us become leaders and knowledgeable in this area, we need to take that message back home to our communities and our churches. I want to throw out a second question to you, and that is, what is one of the biggest lessons that you have learned in your work? And maybe try to reverse the order here. Lori, could you begin and tell us what is one of the biggest lessons you've learned?
The biggest lesson that I have learned is that the poor people do not consider themselves to be poor. And so, as a result, there are no poor people, there are just people.
All right, thank you. Reminds me of the fact that so often we approach a community where there is material poverty and chronicle its list of problems. How much more effective it can be when we move into a community of material poverty. They may have greater spiritual wealth and emotional community wealth than some of us do, but a place of material poverty, and instead list all the strengths that they can build upon, because unless people are building upon the strengths that they bring to the situation, they will not be empowered to be a part of the solution, and when the outside investment is no longer sustainable, they will be not much farther than where they were at the beginning. All right, who is next? Reverse order here. Arn, what are one of the biggest lessons you've learned?
Well, having worked in the city to try to bring the community together for the last 16, 17 years, I think probably the thing that impresses me the most is that it's going to take a lot of people with a lot of passion to work together in unity, recognizing we can't all do it alone, but we can do it together. And the government is probably good at dealing with the issues of the mind and the body to some extent, but it's going to be the community that deals with the heart and the soul of people. And if we're going to bring transformation to our city, it's going to take all of us becoming friends of the poor, learning how to relate effectively, to love them as Christ commands us, to love our neighbor as ourselves. And to do that, we really have to be founded in what God tells us in His Word. And I find so many Christians today are not reading their Bible as they should. They really don't know what it says. And we need to get back to that. We also have to learn the value and the power of prayer, because miracles only occur when there's prayer. And people that have experienced the miracles of prayer are the ones that are praying. And the people in the community that I think are praying the most that I've found in the city are the grandmamas and the great-grandmamas. They are loving their grandkids, even though their grandkids may be off doing things that they never imagined their kids to do. But they love them and they're praying for them. And so many that we talk to in prison still remember their mother, their grandmother, and their great-grandma. And that's a value that exists in the family that has in so many cases fallen apart. The fathers have disappeared for whatever reason. The mothers are busy working or with other things, and the kids are raising themselves. And there's some real challenges with that when the kids are left alone. And through that, we suffer all the abuses that we've talked about this morning. Those kids don't know what a good, healthy family is, the way we do as older people. They've got to learn that somehow. And that's, I see one of the greatest challenges is how do we bring that change back to the culture of black families in the South where they were very united. We don't have that today in the inner city in many cases. And to get back to that is the big challenge that I see, and it's not easy.
All right, thank you, Arn. I think sometimes the most powerful ministry that I see is when African American men who have been disenfranchised and discriminated against and struggled in so many ways come together and work to be a part of the transformation of their community. It's an amazing and a wonderful thing to see. Sharon, would you like to give us your perspective? What are one of the strongest lessons that you have learned?
Well, I've learned to be careful. Mm-hmm. Be careful to think that what I see may be the truth. I've learned to listen and not to overstate. And I've learned that when God is with us and we join hands and we work and we take action, there's changes. So I don't want to overstate. But in the community that I live in that was, again, rated the third in the nation going in poverty, it had all the symptoms, the crime, the violence, but it also had men who wanted work, men who cared for their families. It had men who are doing that are really working themselves in unbelievable ways with tension to make this work. And I've learned that for us and for me, it's important every day to make those men visible and to allow them to love me. So here's a little thing. I have some bad habits. I leave doors open. I leave my garage door open. I leave my car door open. And I find that when I pull in at night because I'm not scared to be out at night. I got things to do. Amen. These teenagers in hoodies show up, and they approach, and I'm looking, and they say, "Miss Sharon, do you need some help?" And I say, "Yes, I do. I have groceries." And they said, "Is your door open?" And I said, "Yes, it is, probably." And they carry the groceries in my home. Now, why am I saying that when we're looking for such big answers? Love is so empowering. Love is empowering. And they know I don't play, that I have high expectations, and that they cannot fail if they're willing to try. So that's what these black men and teenagers are teaching me, that they love me, and I have the honor of loving them.
Thank you. George, go ahead.
It's rather nerve-wracking sitting between these two. I'll see if I can keep up with them. What I have learned is there are a tremendous amount of wonderful organizations, individuals doing great work all over the city of Milwaukee. But my end of it is a simple end of it, and that's just jobs, 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 and economic development. And thank you. It's rather idealistic, maybe. Determined, for sure. Called, yes. Daunting, absolutely. But at our organization, we have a very simple HR manual. It's a large 3-wing binder with an agenda that's empty, and there's no additional papers in it. We bring people into our organization, and we have 3 words, and I learned this today from Lori's presentation that I didn't know correlated, but we have 3 words in our HR manual. It's love, care, and concern. And then we teach them this work thing. And based on what Sharon was just talking about, when people respond to love, when you see a 41-year-old grown man who just got out of prison for drug dealing telling me the other day that he knows I love him and he knows I care for him, is a miracle. But what I learned today, that this brain trauma disorder, that it can be healed. And I think the word you used was love, care, and trusted relationships. What a daunting thing. I don't think so, because all of us have that, right? I think we all experience people that have some stress in their life. They're on pills, they have high blood pressure, and they're not little African-American kids in the Central City. They're white adults out in the suburbs. So how do we fix that? We give them a place that they can call their home, that they can be a part of the team. And what we've learned over the last 7 years, similar to what Sharon just said, people want to work. We're made in the image of God to work. What makes you think people don't? But the problem is, if I can take on one more little issue, poverty just continues on the rise. And what's frustrating to me, as a born and bred Milwaukeean, is we come to seminars, we read the newspapers, we watch the media, and it just continues to go up. And what do we do about it, which I think is one of the questions, which I'll get back to in a few minutes. It's frustrating that it just continues. And I do understand Scripture that the poor will always be amongst us, but that's not our motto. We know they're going to be there, but we're going to keep working towards it. So my biggest lesson is people do want to work because they respond to love, care, and concern. Of all the people in here collecting a paycheck from somebody, who doesn't like to work for a boss that respects and loves you?
Amen.
It's pretty simple.
Thank you, George. Jillian, will you wrap up this question for us and give us your perspective?
Sure. The biggest lesson that I've learned is that people are in pain. And I cannot share my faith with them. I cannot educate them. I cannot try to teach them job training until I meet the needs of their pain. What we see are symptoms of pain that is deeper than we can imagine, and we have to, as a body, meet needs. and help people. And the other big lesson that I have learned is that we have low expectations. The fact that we build jails based upon the 3rd grade reading and math scores of the African American boys just indicates that we have low expectations. And so we have to raise our expectations. And I think that that will help us.
Thank you so much. My biggest lesson learned, I think, in the last 10 years is to slow down. My cultural background sort of predisposes me to time management and efficiency and speed. And those things do not work well when you're trying to help someone with the transformation of their life. And I learned a great deal from a couple of authors of the book and tape series, Helping Without Hurting. I encourage every Christian who wants to make a difference to read that book or listen to that series of CDs. They talk about 3 stages of transformation or of work, being relief, rehabilitation, and redevelopment. And I think too often, because it's easier and more gratifying, we spend too much of our time in relief mode, providing people with clothing and other kinds of basic assistance, when we should long before have moved out of this relief stage that you really ought to be only be in when people are in a state of emergency and disaster and they cannot do something for themselves. We stay too long in that arena because it's easier. It's a whole lot easier. And it's more gratifying. You feel so good to help someone and hand them something that they need, but you're fostering dependency that harms them. And then we need to move quickly from relief to rehabilitation, where we, as we've talked about here, where we step alongside them and coach them and allow them to do for themselves, but walk alongside them and give them counsel when they seek it and reflect back to them how their lives can be different. And then we need to move, and we haven't talked too much about that here other than Sharon's work in the community, but we need to move beyond helping an individual to working with a collection of individuals whose lives are in better condition for having known us, and help them to collectively transform a community and develop the resources within that community that can continue to sustain and help people. Otherwise, our work is really not accomplishing what in our hearts we want it to accomplish. So that's my learning has been to slow down and to get myself out of relief mode as soon as I possibly can, so that I am not harming while I'm trying to help. And that can be a challenge when you're an organization like many of ours. Ours last year used 1,500 volunteers, and volunteers without the depth of understanding want to do those relief measures. And so you need to try to engage them, but at the same time educate them so they're willing to walk with you down a different path rather than stay in that same mode. So that's been my learning. We have 2 other questions that we have before us and about 6 minutes to cover them. So I would like to just roll them together. The last 2 questions we wanted to address are, how can we do a better job together, and what are some tools that churches and ministries can use? And I'm just going to look over my panel and ask who would like to begin our conversation on that. Go ahead, Jillian.
I'll just say a quick something because I am very moved by being in here today. One of the things that my pastor says, Pastor Malone from New Testament, he always tells us that we need to look in the house. And as I look in this room today and I hear the panel sharing and other things that have been shared today, there are so many resources in the house. And we just have to collaborate and act. So I know that oftentimes we sit and we have these big symposiums and these great discussions and we talk about all these great things, and then we go back to our everyday routines and we do nothing. And so my charge is just that we can come together and move to action and collaborate and use the many resources that we have within the room.
All right, excellent. Someone else, would you like to comment?
There's an area of need in the city, and that is for men and women that are coming out of prison. There are 5,000 to 7,000 of them returning from prisons around the state into the Milwaukee area. And I see that as a tremendous opportunity to come alongside those men and women who truly want to change their lives. We have a lot of prison ministries that are going on in prison when they get into trouble. And many of them are finding out that there is a better way to live. And they get out of prison and they go back to their old neighborhood and they lose that fellowship that they had in prison with the prison Bible study groups and so on. And we need to help those guys and gals find out what it takes to really change and transform their lives and come alongside them and help them, because they have to want to, in most cases, get back with their kids. They feel a responsibility for being good fathers, but they don't know how to. And there are so many things in the system that seems to keep them from really reuniting with a lifestyle that's healthy. And so we've developed a Genesis project, a program now, whereby we work with them while they're in prison to help them readjust their thinking and being prepared for a working job and how to prepare for that, but also how to reunite with their family, how to live a disciplined lifestyle when they get out. We meet them at the gate, so to speak, to make sure that they get back to a safe housing situation, that they understand what it's going to take to fulfill their plan, their life plan, that they have to put together for the parole agent while they're in prison. And when they get out and get through that welcome phase, go into a work phase that they learn how to work and have people that come alongside them to help them, be their advocates to the employer, to help them and understand what's going on, but when they get into trouble, help them succeed even in changing while they're working, not lose their job, but keep it, and working with employers that understand that process. And then eventually get to the wealth stage where they learn how to use the funds that they have, the resources they have, and then become, in the fifth stage, returning citizens to a community where they're ready for it. Then to stay with them through that whole process, that there's support from the community that can help them when they get into trouble. I think that's an example of what we can do. And there are tools available to do that. That's a long conversation. I know you're out of time, but that's what we're looking at.
All right, thank you, Arne. George?
I'll be quick. In my spare time, I run an executive recruiting firm. I deal with corporations all over the United States, Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 companies. And you know what they do when they need top talent? They call guys like us and say, find me the best CFO, find me the best general counsel. And so here's my challenge in my vision, hopefully down the road. We need to start a company that's called Kill Poverty. All right? And when an existing corporation, when they look for top talent, they call and they get the best CEO, the best CFO, the best general counsel, and they consolidate these board of directors and say, here's our marketing plan, here's our sales department, here's what we're going to do, and in 10 years, they're Briggs and Stratton. So my challenge is, how do we grab people? I mean, I have no idea how he does what he does. I have no idea what Lori does, or Dr. Peoples does, or Sharon does, but I know we're talented people that can do certain things, but what we have to do is start a company called Kill Poverty and say in 10 years we'll have 10,000 employees doing something. The question is, what's that something? That's why great minds should get together and create that plan so we can go into the central cities and create jobs. Again, my end of it is jobs, and I'm happy about that.
All right. Thank you, Sharon.
Well, it's happening. Remember I started with the vision? What we desire is already happening. We just have to walk into it and do it. I'm going to talk about two happenings, three, real quickly. One, Mary Ann Dawson invited me to pray on Saturday morning at 5 o'clock. I don't know what time you prayed, but wouldn't it be something if we had a corporate prayer that we knew that we were all praying for our healing and abundance? I think it's powerful. The second, some of you, I'm going to lift Well, I won't do that. But Bill Krugler is already working to bring businesses alive in this city. And you can join, or you can do it yourself, because we know we need work. And the third is places matter. People live in homes, they go to schools, so place-based initiatives matter. Find a place and connect to it, and don't leave it. Learn from it, stay with it. Those would be my 3 invitations.
My recommendation is that you would do what you do best, and that's pray. I have long prayed for, hoped for prayer services for the city of Milwaukee. And I don't understand why that doesn't happen. But I know the people in the room could make that happen, and I have a vision where pastors of all different faiths come together and build a network where there's regular prayer services for the city itself and the people who live there, for the people who serve, for the people who want to serve, don't know how to get involved. Also, I would suggest that churches work to appoint members onto the boards of these companies that are doing work. So connect yourselves more directly to the grassroots so that you can assess the real needs of what's needed in the community and how your church can help.
Thank you, Lori. I'll just close us with this and turn it back to Linda. As I was listening to the comments, I was reminded of just a single sentence that I read in a book. It was a sequel to the book Same Kind of Different as Me. If you've not read it, I encourage you to read it, written by Ron Hall and Denver Moore. 2 men, one black, one white, who befriended each other and then walked through some transformation in each of their lives, because the transformation ought to be two-way, whether you're materially poor or materially rich. You need to be transformed in this process. And they walked through that together and then traveled the country speaking. And they said that everywhere they went, the community had a 100-day or a 10-year plan to end homelessness. One of the 2 men had been homeless. And they began to look at the statistics of the city, and they found that in nearly every city they visited, the number of homeless people nearly exactly correlated with the number of churches in that city. And that if each church, large or small, just adopted, if you will, or walked alongside one homeless individual, you could end homelessness not in 10 years, but in 10 days. And having done a little of that with individuals, I know the resources it takes, it can feel overwhelming for even the helper, let alone the person walking through it without resources. It's overwhelming. And yet, if the church would walk alongside them, the transformations that we could see would be amazing. And what a testimony it would be to an unbelieving world watching if the church could be the church. We know that we often hear that 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week in America. And it's encouraging to see some diversity in our group here today. I think one of the things that, just speaking for myself from the perspective of a white Christian, that I can do is learn from black authors, submit myself to the authority of black leaders, come alongside them, bring resources that they may not have to the knowledge that I do not have, and see God work in powerful ways. So we thank you, and I thank the panel. Would you all help me in thanking them?